Republicans announced last week they want the anonymous whistleblower whose complaint launched an impeachment proceeding into President Trump to testify publicly. President Trump himself has repeatedly called for the whistleblower to reveal his or her identity. For more on this, I want to bring in John Kostyack. He's the executive director of the National Whistleblower Center. Thanks so much for being with us, John. Explain to us what rights and protections whistleblowers have.
Okay, well, first of all, there are dozens of whistleblower laws, and so the answer varies according to whether you work for the federal government, whether you work for the private sector. Both private and public whistleblowers have different kinds of protections. In the case of the Ukraine whistleblowers, they are in this unique category of intelligence community whistleblowers, and they have important protections, but they're not quite as strong as other protections for the rest of the federal government.
President Trump, as you know, has repeatedly called for the whistleblower whose complaint launched the impeachment inquiry to come forward. And just this weekend, the president tweeted, "Where's the whistleblower?" Do you think President Trump should have the right to know the identity of the person accusing him?
No, you know, one of the most important protections all whistleblowers have is the right to be protected against reprisals, retaliation. There's a long and horrible history of people losing their jobs, having threats to themselves and their families because they've spoken out, simply notifying authorities about lawbreaking. So Congress has passed a variety of laws that essentially guarantee whistleblowers the right to keep their identity confidential. And that applies to this whistleblower. The two whistleblowers who went to the Inspector General of the intelligence communities had a right to have their identities kept confidential, and we at the National Whistleblower Center have been working hard to help them protect that right.
Well, Democrats have expressed concern over possible whistleblower testimony and even considered concealing the person's voice or appearance. What more do you think needs to be done to protect whistleblowers?
Well, what's interesting right now is all of the information that the whistleblowers put into that complaint that the Congress ultimately released to the public has been proven to be correct and been validated by people who were on the scene, people who were witnesses to the key conversations, to the key documents that were made available. So every indication is that the investigators in Congress right now don't need these whistleblowers any longer to provide any testimony. They can now fade into the background, and the people who have the firsthand information, who were on the scene, the documents that show the types of conversations that took place relating to the request for help with elections from the Ukrainian president, all of that is now likely to come out from other witnesses. If that's the case, it's kind of hard to see when these whistleblowers would be needed and why their identities would ever need to be known.
Because, as you know, one of the arguments is that both the president and his supporters have put forward is the idea that in order to have due process and have it be conducted in a transparent way, this identity of the whistleblower needs to be revealed. What do you say to that?
Well, they're implying that we're in a trial situation. And yes, certainly when people get convicted for crimes at trials, they have a right to confront their accuser. That's the Sixth Amendment to our Constitution. We're not in a trial situation. Even the impeachment trial, if it were to happen in the Senate, would not be governed by those same rules. But let's just say, out of a sense of fairness, when there is a trial, the president ought to meet his accusers. But this is not the case. Right now, we're in an investigation phase, more analogous to when a prosecutor convenes a grand jury or otherwise collects evidence behind the scenes, decides what evidence is the most valuable, the most credible, and then decides what's to put forward in the trial. So we're in that early stage right now. There's no reason for all the people who are feeding evidence into the investigators to have to step forward and put themselves at risk for all of the abuse that whistleblowers oftentimes get exposed to.
John, taking a step back more broadly, what role do whistleblowers play in the United States government?
Well, that's the most important question. The reason we fight so hard to protect the rights of whistleblowers and protect them against retaliation is because they play a really vital role in protecting our democracy. Our democracy is based upon this idea that no one is above the law. And we really care about enforcing the law, and that powerful people don't get a separate set of rules. How are we going to make that happen other than to find out from the people who have the inside information about crime tell them that we want to hear from them. And we're going to protect them if they step forward. So we have this body of law that's been developed over centuries, actually started at the founding of this country, where we tell whistleblowers, we want your information, we want to find ways to encourage you to step forward. In the private sector, you can actually get rewarded for helping produce large-scale penalties against criminals. There's various ways we've sent a message out saying, we need you to make this democracy function, to protect our rule of law.
All right, John Kostyack for us. John, thanks very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.